Okay, thank you. So it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the first electronic meeting of the Union Township Planning Commission and our regular May meeting. So we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
We have a flag.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America,
to the republic
for which it stands, one nation,
under God, indivisible,
with
liberty
liberty and justice for all.
That went well. So
That was different.
roll call.
I can do roll call.
Thank you.
Squattrito,
Here.
Webster,
Here,
Fuller,
here.
Darren,
Here.
Shingles,
Here.
Buckley,
Here.
Baring,
Here.
LaBelle,
Here.
Cody.
Here.
Everyone's present.
Thank you. And we also have our township staff, Nanny and Gallané and Loveberry. Thank you. So we last met on February 18th. So in your packet, you've got minutes for the February 18th meeting. So we'll take those up first. Are there any corrections to the February 18th minutes? I thought they looked pretty complete to me.
I'll move the regular meeting minutes of February 18th, 2020 be approved as presented. Support.
So there was a motion by Webster to approve the February 18th minutes as presented with a second by Cody, I believe. Further discussion? Are we roll calling this, or are we doing a voice vote for the minutes?
Well, that is up to you. The Board of Trustees has had a policy of roll call votes for everything. The Economic Development Authority did an interesting take on that. They did a voice vote, but had everybody physically raise their hand, so you could both see and hear that they voted. So I'll give you that as an option.
I'm fine with roll call for our action items, but considering that minutes without modifications, my understanding of Robert's rules is that they can actually be declared accepted by the chair. But since we had a motion, I'll ask everyone to say aye and raise their hand if you're in favor of approving the minutes. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so our minutes are approved. Thank you. Next item is correspondence, board reports, and presentations. I noticed that there's some correspondence, so we'll start with that. Anything that Rodney or Peter would like to say about the Rotary Club letter and the update about recent training workshop?
I will start with the Rotary Club letter, and then I'll turn the time over to Peter for the other item. The Rotary Club sent this to us. It came in obviously just in time for the COVID-19 outbreak to stop things, but they are essentially interested in potential projects. So this has been shared with the Board of Trustees, also the Economic Development Authority, and so sharing it with you as well, that they're interested in potentially partnering on a variety of possible projects. So just as you are looking at the township, as you're considering your community, your neighborhood, if you see something that has some potential that fits within the scope of their areas of interest, please let me know. You're welcome to send me an email. We can maybe see what we can do to help them in their efforts, and also to help the township move forward.
Any questions about that? And then the other item?
So the other item that you'll find is a memo during the pandemic when the township was closed for all of the month of April, and we found ourselves working from home. MAP, Michigan Association of Planning, was conducting trainings, seminars, luncheons through Zoom, same application we're using here for tonight, with guidance on best practices of how local governments could proceed to still conduct business during the pandemic. We've actually taken and adopted many of the practices that they have advised on, the one being tonight, holding meetings virtually through applications of Zoom. So when you have a chance, if you can take a look at the memo if you haven't already. This is going to be a continuing series. My first topic for this meeting was on best practices during the pandemic. There were some other interesting topics that we discussed, and those will be coming in a future meeting memo. So hopefully you take a look at it and get something from it.
Okay. Any questions for Peter on that? All right, thank you. So board reports, anything from the Board of Trustees, Lisa?
The board adopted a general extraction ordinance. I want to read a little bit about that. The extraction ordinance strikes a balance between business, stakeholder, and community interests. The township recognizes that sand and gravel and other non-metallic materials within the township boundaries are non-renewable natural resources necessary and beneficial to the welfare of its inhabitants and surrounding region. The extraction ordinance provides for utilization of these resources in a manner compatible with the surrounding uses, protection of human health and the environment. Okay.
Any questions on that? That, of course, is something that we'll be dealing with relatively soon, not at this meeting, but in an upcoming meeting. Anything else from the board?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you.
They did not nominate a planning commission member yet.
Okay. So we'll just hold on to Denise.
Yeah.
I can hang on for a little longer, you know, things aren't moving real quick.
Well, technically, somebody was nominated, but they just didn't approve of the person. So there was somebody that was nominated, though.
Yeah, they haven't elected anyone yet or selected anyone yet. Anything from the Zoning Board of Appeals?
Not much. The most recent meeting that we had, I believe it was it the March meeting, Rodney? I think we were canceled in April. We had election of officers in that meeting, and then we also had a training session that Rodney provided just to kind of talk about roles and responsibilities and factors that we should consider as part of our role in the Zoning Board of Appeals. And that was the extent of our meeting. So nothing horribly new since the previous meeting.
Okay. Any questions for Ryan? All right, thank you. Sidewalks and pathways, anything?
I'll have to yield to Peter. Since I wasn't thinking I was still on that committee, and I don't think we've met, have we, Peter?
No, we have not.
Okay.
So nothing.
I can add just a small bit to that. The next meeting of the sidewalk committee is at the end of June. I think it's June 29th, I think. And right now, the idea is that the committee members are identifying potential sidewalk project areas that for high priority activity, both for next fiscal year and even in years beyond. And the idea is that the June meeting will be reviewing those lists and begin to prioritize for the next fiscal year budget.
Okay, very good. Any questions on any of that? Anybody else have anything to present or report? Okay, thank you. So the next item is approval of agenda. So our agenda has one new business item and three other business items, which are things that are coming back to us that we've looked at before. Is there anything else that is anyone's aware of that needs to be on tonight's agenda? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda as prepared.
So move.
Motion is
Support.
by Webster with a second by Buckley to approve the agenda as prepared. Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye and hold up your hand. Aye.
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 That looked like full approval, so we'll consider our agenda to be approved. So the next item is public comment. So this is the public comment that comes at the early part of the meeting. This is limited to 3 minutes and to items that are not on tonight's agenda. So items that are on tonight's agenda will be dealt with in turn and then are subject to the public comment at the end of the meeting. But this is for items not on tonight's agenda. If there's anyone who would like to address the Planning Commission, we'd ask you, if possible, to click on the raise your hand button, and then we'll recognize you and bring you into the room where you can speak. So is there anyone who would like to address the Planning Commission in public comment? And I'll note that our attendees that are currently here are here for the agenda item, so we'll assume that they're not going to address us in public comment. So seeing none, we'll go ahead and close that back up and we'll move on. So we have one new business item. Normally we elect officers on an annual basis, and we used to do it in January, but we decided that was too early, so we decided we would do it in March. But of course, we didn't meet in March, we didn't meet in April. So we haven't yet elected officers for the 2020 year. So we'll do that now. I think there's normally 4. You list 3. You list the chair, vice chair, and secretary. We usually have a vice secretary as well, who serves in case the secretary is absent. So unless I hear objection, we'll go ahead and do those 4. So we'll take them in order. The first would be the chair. Are there any nominations for the chair of the Planning Commission?
I nominate Phil Squartrito.
So Stan Shingles has nominated me. I'm willing to serve. Jim?
I'm saying yes.
Okay. Are there any other nominations? Are there any nominations of anyone else for chair? I've always been taught to say it 3 times. Are there any other nominations for chair? Any other nominations for chair? Okay.
May I make a motion to close the nominations and pass and cast an anonymous ballot?
Unanimous.
Thank you. Yeah, that word.
Unanimous. Not anonymous.
Yeah, I know.
So there's a motion by Webster to close nominations and cast a unanimous ballot. Is there a second to that motion?
Support.
Second.
Second is by Shingles. Any further discussion? All in favor of that? I don't know, do you want to move to the roll call on this, since we're doing substantive issues, so let's go ahead and test it out. Do you want to
Cody?
Yes.
LaBelle?
Yes.
Faring?
Yes.
Buckley?
Yes.
Shingles,
Yes.
Darren,
Yes.
Fuller,
Yes.
Webster,
Yes.
Squatrito.
Yeah, yes. Thanks for the vote of support. I appreciate it. Next is vice chair. So the role of the vice chair would be mainly to conduct the meeting in the absence of the chair. Right? And although that doesn't happen often, there's always a possibility it could happen. So we should have a person who's willing to step up and operate in that instance if that were to happen. I think at one point our vice chair was Brian Milkey, who left the commission, and then he was replaced by Denise, according to the paperwork.
Mhm.
Denise is kind of serving on borrowed time here, so, but are there any nominations for vice chair? Nominations?
I'll
and
nominate
self-nom-
Ryan Buckley.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, I'd like to nominate Ryan Buckley if he's willing.
I'd be willing.
Are there other nominations?
Motion to approve Ryan Buckley as the vice chair.
Support.
Okay, so there was a motion by LaBelle with a second by Darren, I believe, yes, to close nominations and cast a unanimous ballot for Ryan Buckley for the vice chair of the Planning Commission for 2020. Any discussion? All in favor? Well, actually, I'll let Jennifer do her magic.
Squatrito,
Yes.
Fuller,
Yes.
Shingles,
Yes.
Faring,
Yes.
Buckley,
Yes.
Darren,
Yes.
Cody,
Yes.
Webster,
Yes.
LaBelle.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. So the next one is secretary. Secretary takes minutes, but also keeps track of the plans we're working on. It makes sure that we have our conditions correct, signs the plans, site plans, and so on. And of course, Alex has been serving as the secretary for a good long time now. Are there any nominations for secretary?
I nominate Alex Fuller.
Is Alex willing to serve?
Yes, I'm willing to serve.
Okay. Are there
I'll
other
support. Sorry.
nominations for secretary? Any other nominations? Okay. I'd entertain a motion to close nominations, cast a ballot, unanimous ballot.
So
So
moved.
moved. Second.
I'm guessing the so moved was Shingles, is that right?
Buckley.
Buckley.
And the second was Webster.
Yes.
Yep.
And
Yes.
go ahead and call the roll.
Faring,
Yes.
Buckley,
Yes.
Shingles,
Yes.
Darren,
Yes.
Fuller,
Yes.
Webster,
Yes.
Squatrito,
Yes.
LaBelle,
Yes.
Cody.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And so we'll go ahead and also elect a vice secretary, excuse me. Vice secretary takes the minutes in the absence of the secretary, makes notations on the site plan, signs the site plan, signs the minutes, and so on. Is there a nomination for vice secretary?
I'll do it if nobody else wants to.
So there's a self-nomination for Mike Darren. Are there any other nominations for vice secretary? He's done an
Motion to
outstanding and
accept
valuable
and-
job with all.
Motion to accept and approve Mike Darren as Vice Secretary.
Motion was by Shingle. Is there a second? We'll give it to Cody this time. One more call of the roll.
Squatrito,
Yes.
Webster,
Yes.
Fuller,
Yes.
Darren,
Yes.
Shingles,
Yes.
Buckley,
Yes.
Faring,
Yes.
LaBelle,
Yes.
and Cody.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. So congratulations to everyone, and look forward to a great year, whether it's all on here or whether it's a mix of here and back in the Township Hall. So we're ready to move on to our other business. So we're going to go first to home occupation permit application 20-01. The applicants are Roy and Jerry Hoyt. The address 2305 East Millbrook Road. And this is the application for doing oil changes and kind of routine maintenance on taxis in an accessory building. So I'll first ask for the updates from staff, and then we'll hear from the applicant or the applicant's representative.
He's got to unmute.
Rodney, I think you're muted.
I muted myself. Sorry about that. And before we hear from staff, I'm going to go ahead and promote Bruce Hoyt to panelist, so he will be available. Just make sure he can hear and see. So it'll take just a moment for him to appear on our screen.
Yeah.
Ask him to start his video. And ask him to unmute himself. Okay. All right, there we go. Okay, so just if I could, I would like to actually turn for the staff update, turn this over to Peter to provide the update for this item.
Okay, so since we last met, Rodney and I, we had met with Bruce, or excuse me, we didn't meet with Bruce, we met with Roy, and Roy had talked with Bruce, and Bruce had submitted a letter satisfying some of the issues that we had from our last meeting. In the memo that I provided for you, you'll find the recommendation from myself is to recommend approval of the home occupation permit subject to the following conditions. The first being all vehicle repair services and activities for the taxi service must take place entirely within the accessory building. Parking, storage, or servicing of taxi service vehicles outside of the accessory building is prohibited. And finally, the taxi service office cannot be operated on site with residents that do not reside at the home. Within your packet on page, it would be 24. You can see the letter that was submitted, signed by Bruce, updating the application. This is a new amendment to the application, one that we did not have back in January when we first held the public hearing for this item.
Okay. Did you have anything else to report or to add, Peter?
Nope, that's the only thing that has changed since the last time we've met.
Okay. So,
I think if I may just
in your
add one item, if I would, and that is,
yeah, please.
the one item I would add is that you should have received the motion template for this item. It didn't. It was inadvertently left out by me out of the packet, but you should have received a copy of that has the various potential motions for this item. I can put it on the screen as well if you need.
Yeah, to anyone who has those, they were in the oh God, whichever meeting this was first discussed, January or February. If you have those, I didn't bring that with me either. So, but what is in our packet is the criteria, if you will, for home occupations, which is on page 17 of your packet. So, if it's your pleasure, we can go through those. If anyone has any questions for the applicant, we can certainly ask those as well.
They're gonna wanna know why, and I can't answer it.
So, commissioners, what's your pleasure? Would you like to go through the list of requirements, or are you comfortable that I mean, township staff is basically saying they're comfortable that all of these are met at this point, but if you'd like to go through them, we can certainly do that.
Since we have talked about this on several occasions in a past meeting, and it looks to me like from the packet and from everything that was presided by the staff that everything that we've talked about has been completed, and it doesn't appear to me that there's anything in there that we really that's new. So with that, I would like to make the motion just to recommend the approval of that home occupation permit, unless there's any other discussions.
What do you got there? Oh, that's.
We already filled that out.
Yeah, this is actually, it's not a recommendation. This is actually our approval. So you can see Rodney's put up the motion. If it's a motion to approve.
I would be happy to make the motion to approve.
But vehicles cannot be parked outside at all at Dan's house. So they have to pull right in, right back out again.
Not sure whose conversation that is, but they may want to unmic themselves.
Well, we have the applicant. I don't think we've actually heard from the applicant yet.
No.
Have an update from them.
Yeah, they're fine.
So we do have some conditions. So I would suggest anyway that the motion be the second one.
Yes, and I'd be happy to read that if that is where we're at this point.
That's fine. I think that's okay to do.
Okay. I would move that we approve the home occupation 2001 home occupation permit application from Roy and Jerry Hoyt for an auto repair shop home occupation in a detached accessory building at 2305 East Millbrook Road, parcel number 14033300202 in an ag district, finding that it can comply with the applicable zoning ordinance requirements, including section 8.19 home occupation, subject to the following conditions. All vehicle repair services and activities where the taxi service must place entirely within the accessory building. Parking, storage, or servicing of taxi service vehicles outside of the accessory building is prohibited, and the taxi service office cannot be operated on site with residents that do not reside at the home.
Okay, motion has been made by Webster. Is there a second?
Support.
Support or second by Darren.
LaBelle.
Was it LaBelle?
You had two at the same time.
Oh, gotcha. I didn't hear you, Mike. That's
That's
fine.
all right. That's all right.
Give it to the
So
guy with the
make
nice view.
Well, I think LaBelle is the one that I heard, and then I saw a hand from Darren. So we'll give it to LaBelle. So the motion is by Webster, second by LaBelle. Further discussion? Go ahead and call the roll on this one, please.
Cody,
Yes.
Squittrito,
Yes.
LaBelle,
Yes.
Webster,
Yes,
Faring,
Yes.
Fuller,
Yes.
Buckley,
Yes.
Darren,
Yes.
and Shingles.
Yes.
Okay, motion carried. Thank you. So, Mr. Hoyt, this is approved. So I'm assuming you'll work with township staff to get that all, whatever remaining paperwork is required. I don't know what that would be, but it's approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move on. The next item is special use permit application 20-01, Robert and Lauren Welch, 4175 East Wing Road. And this is the group daycare. And so we had looked at this earlier and we postponed it because there were some questions regarding fencing and drop off and vehicles and things of that nature. So are you, Rodney, do you want to bring her in?
Yep, she dropped off for a moment. She's here back on the attendee list, so I will promote her. So give her just a moment to appear and to get connected. Let's go start video. All right. She is here.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
So first, I'll ask for the updates. They're in our packet, but if Rodney or Peter wants to summarize what's been updated, just for the sake of the broadcast.
I will turn this over to Peter as well to update on that.
So if you will turn your attention to the memo in your packet, it's been some time since we've met on this application as well. You'll find on page 27 of 42 in the packet, there's a section that we've begun adding this year to our memo's key findings. So in some of the issues that we had from the previous meetings, I've indicated those in the key findings of the updated amended application. So we have key findings: property is zoned ag agricultural. Property is not within 1,500 feet of another licensed group daycare home, adult foster, small care home, or large group home facility offering substance abuse treatment, or a community correction center, halfway house, or similar facility. Currently, no fences on site, but a 4-foot high fence for the safety of the children has been proposed. In the rear, you'll find that attached plan in the application. The group daycare home will operate from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. Any employee outside of the home will require 1 parking space. The space has been identified inside the garage. Again, there's an attached plan indicating where this spot will be. There's also an email attached indicating the time of service from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Parking on the road is prohibited. Driveway is long enough to park multiple vehicles in 2 lanes. Longer term parking will be on the right and closer to the house. Short-term park pickup and drop off will be located in the left lane with a 20-foot by 30-foot turnaround area to the west. There is a sketch drawing showing this in the application. Applicant has demonstrated in writing that no parking will be permitted for the group daycare home on the lawn or within the road right-of-way. A pickup drop-off plan has been submitted. Deadline for fencing, rear yard, and turnaround parking to be completed is July 31st, 2020. That's been indicated in the date set by the applicant. With these improvements made, this project will comply with all necessary requirements. My recommendation for the zoning administrator at this time would to recommend approval of the application to the Board of Trustees with the following condition: that the applicant obtains state license and submits copy to the Township zoning administrator.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So questions for Peter or for the applicant?
You have a hand up, Mr. Fuller has his hand up.
Ryan?
No, I'm sorry. I was fidgeting with a pen. Sorry. I will say that it seems pretty straightforward, and I don't have any additional questions or comments.
Okay. Was that the hand you were indicating to me?
No, Alex Fuller has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Alex?
Yeah, I think the project, she worked through all our questions and concerns pretty well. I'd like to make a motion that we recommend to the Township Board with conditions that the applicant obtain a state license for the facility and submit the copy to the zoning administrator.
So here again, if it's helpful, we do have the draft motion template. The reason we suggested is because it gets all the information into the record that way. So I've just posted that on the screen with the second.
So you want that read as part of the motion?
If we could, because it does make sure that all the information is in the meeting minutes that way.
Okay. So supported by, what do I do there?
I would just make your motion to recommend.
Okay, I'll make a motion to recommend approval with conditions, to recommend to the Township Board of Trustees to approve PSUP 20-01 special use permit application from Robert and Lauren Welch for a group daycare home at 4175 East Wing Road in the Ag District, finding that it can comply with the applicable zoning ordinance requirements, including section 30.4.j group daycare home, subject to the following condition. The applicant shall obtain a state license for this facility and shall submit a copy of the approved license to the zoning township administrator for the township's records.
So the motion has been made by Fuller. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Darren. Further discussion?
In regards to the conditions, is there any need to include in regards to the operation hours and the parking space? Parking is prohibited on the road and the deadline for the fencing and turnaround. Is it important that we put that in as a part of the conditions, or is that just understood that that will be just done?
That is part of the application. That's part of the material that they presented. So it becomes part of the special use permit.
Okay.
So we don't need to specify it separately.
Okay, thank you.
Other discussion or questions? If not, I'll ask Jennifer to call the roll. Oh, sorry. Lisa?
Do we still have to go through the 10 steps being a special use permit?
Well, that's a good question. Did we do, I don't remember if we did that or not. We probably didn't do all of that because, well, I don't know. I just don't remember.
I was thinking we did do that. Day that Lauren's partner was there.
The other thing I would say to that is that this is kind of an unusual special use permit in that it is for a group daycare home in which the state law says specifically in the state act exactly what conditions we can require of them. So although it's a special use permit, we're really governed by the limited set of criteria that Peter went over, the separation at least 1,500 feet apart, setting certain hours, no more than 16 hours in a 24-hour period. There are several items, and those are all in Peter's report. Those are the criteria that we can use to judge this particular special use permit. It doesn't apply to any others, but in this one we are limited to the criteria that's specific to group daycare homes.
Okay. Well, these are what Lisa was referring to is we have this list of criteria in the existing zoning ordinance that we use for, and then there are separate subsections for other types of special uses. What's your pleasure?
The general criteria for special use permits, as I said, would not particularly apply to this because the state law specifically limits us to just the unique criteria that apply to group daycare homes. And absolutely, in any other special use permit, the general criteria, those 10 criteria would be part of the discussion. But in this particular case, we really are limited to the items that were noted in Peter's report.
So if they meet those the state criteria, it can't be denied. Is that what you're saying?
What the law says is if they meet the applicable requirements of the ordinance, which in this case are set by state law, what's in our ordinance is simply reflecting what's in state law, that the special use permit must be approved. Yeah. The language is in the state act that way.
Okay. Then I think I'll ask Jennifer to proceed with the roll call.
Darren,
Yes.
Fuller,
I think he was muted.
He's still muted.
I saw his lips move.
Yes.
Webster,
Yes.
Squittrito,
Yes.
LaBelle,
Yes.
Buckley,
Yes.
Cody,
Yes.
Shingles,
Yes.
and Thering.
Yes.
Okay, that motion carried. So that's a recommendation to the township board. And so you have one more hurdle to go, but you're now past the planning commission. So congratulations and good luck.
Thank
Good luck,
you.
Lauren.
Thank you.
All right. So, put Lauren back to an attendee.
Is there any order? Are you using a completely different order each time to keep us on our toes? I haven't figured out the order yet.
It's random.
It is random. I like that variety. All right. So we have one more business item, which is the zoning ordinance update. So you all have your binder. And hopefully you've all been glued to your binder for the last couple weeks here, or whenever. And so we want to, there have been some substantial revisions as a result of our earlier runs through. And you also have a multi-page memo from Rodney, which was originally dated March 9th. I guess I'll ask Rodney if there's anything you want to say, or Peter, if there's anything you want to say about this. And then I thought what we would do is go through these sections and ask if anyone has any further thoughts on these sections, or I guess any other sections, but focusing primarily on these sections.
Thank you. And so we did update the memo. It was originally done for your March meeting, and some things have changed since then in terms of the schedule. That's the only part that was updated. What you have the updated zoning ordinance book before you. I have received a few comments, and some of those have been notations of typos, small errors in the document, and I appreciate those. No matter how many times you read a document, you'll always find something, and it's easy to miss little details like that here and there. I know the McKenna folks proofread it, we proofread it, and still there can be things in it. So if you have small items like typos or grammatical issues, feel free to send me an email and just give me the list, page such and such or section such and such, and just make those notes. You're also welcome, if you prefer to scribble on paper, you can do that and either scan and email it to me or drop it off in our Dropbox in the hall. But we'll take all of those items and get those corrected in the as adopted version of the ordinance, or in the next draft if there's a need for another draft. You have in our memo, starting at the bottom of the first page, we have just a list of key sections, as Phil mentioned, that we encourage you to take a look at in particular. These are either sections that have been significantly changed from the previous draft, or they're sections that are certainly key issues in the township, like short-term rental housing and signs and such. So first of all, we have those sections, and we invite any comments on those in particular. Towards the back on page 4, we get into the processes, approval processes, site plan review, special use permit, amendments, and had some comments on the updates that were done to the various review processes and standards. So we're certainly happy to talk about those as well, because those will, you obviously will be following whatever is in the adopted ordinance when we get to that point. And then finally, the last section is an updated timeline. What I will say is the zoning ordinance has been available. It was made available at the Township Hall for about a week, actually almost 2 weeks before the public, the doors were closed to the public. But it has been available on a dedicated website that McKenna Associates has put together since March 16th. The link to that's on our site. We have shared that with a number of people as well that were interested in it. The goal is, at this point, is to ask you to review this document to determine whether it's ready for a public hearing. And the key to this is that it does not have to be exactly what each of you want. If there is a detail or a change that you would prefer to make, we can make those changes any time in the process. Certainly those can be noted at any time, but even after the public hearing, before you make a recommendation to the Board of Trustees, additional changes can be identified. What we'd like to do, if you're in agreement, if you find that in general there are minor things that need to be changed, if you're comfortable with the overall ordinance, what we'd like to do is create a punch list of items that we might include in a recommendation to the Board of Trustees. So, for example, if you find that the site plan section, something in the standards should be changed from X to Y, we can have that as a punch list item that's made part of your motion. As you're recommending the Board of Trustees, it would be a recommendation subject to this being corrected or this being changed. If you feel that this draft is not ready for a public hearing, if you feel that the McKenna Associates and staff just simply didn't do what was needed, and you need to see an updated document and another draft before it goes to a public hearing, that's certainly an option for you as well. So at this point, the goal is to really look at this document with the ideas: is it ready to schedule a public hearing? In this timeline, we note that that we do still want to have an open house event. We had one scheduled. It was scheduled for a date in April. That the COVID-19 virus took that away. We're tentatively looking at a date toward late June, probably the week of June 22nd. This would be a meeting that would be hosted by McKenna Associates. It would be open to the public. We would be inviting the Chamber of Commerce to publicize it. We would put a press release out in the newspaper, and it would be an opportunity outside of a public hearing, a less formal process, for anybody that's interested to comment on it, on the document. The results of that open house, and also the results of the current online comment form that's available for people to use, would all be provided to you as part of the public hearing record. So you'll have all that information coming back to you. At this point, as I said, the timing of the public hearing is entirely up to you when you're comfortable and ready for that to happen. The steps basically are you would schedule agree to schedule a public hearing that would be held at some point, either at the same meeting or a subsequent meeting. A recommendation ultimately would be made to the Township Board of Trustees related to the ordinance. That the ordinance would then be sent not only to the Board of Trustees, but it would be sent to the county for their comments. And the county has 30 days to make any comments they wish before the Board of Trustees would take it up. So that's the general process that we have. At this point, I'm happy to answer any questions. Said anything you Phil, any way you'd like to structure the review, I'm happy to be of help with that.
Okay, thank you. I guess what I thought maybe would make some sense is to go through these sections and ask if there are any questions or concerns or comments on these particular sections, and then perhaps cycle back to other sections if people have other things that they want to bring up. I'm hoping that I don't think we're wanting to do another section by section, page by page review of the entire document, but I think we definitely want to give people a chance to voice their concerns or ask questions that they have. So unless anyone objects, I thought we would just do that in chronological order. The first one is section 3, which is a big one and an important one because that's where all the different zoning classes are laid out and what's allowed and what and all that sort of thing. So section 3.4, the permitted uses by district.
So Alex Fuller's hand is up. I don't know if it was left up or.
No, I have a question. Is it possible to get a version of this with the edit tracking turned on so we can see when changes were made, who did them? Reading in this, I mean, there's changes from earlier drafts in response to direction from the Planning Commission and staff. Well, how are we supposed to track what the staff changes is and whether we, as the Planning Commission, approve that or not?
So that's a great question. It was simply not possible to do a markup version of this document. First of all, because there were a number of organizational changes that staff requested. In the draft, McKenna Associates provided a draft around Christmas time, that draft was reviewed by staff, and we noted some problems with where things were in the document. There were sections that were simply in the wrong place in the document, and so from a logic perspective, when you're looking for information, it was simply not in the right place. And so we asked for changes, and there were quite a few of those, as it turned out, where sections were moved from one place to another. But in addition to that, this process is such that by the time discussing this with Chris Dusen, by the time Chris tried to show his changes and any staff adjustments to the document, it becomes gibberish. It is simply impossible to follow the chain, you might say. But also, this is intended to be the document that is ultimately approved. So at this point, what has been done up to this point has been to set this document up for you to review. Now, if for example, if changes need to be made to this, we would do it with highlighting and strikeout. You know, if you say, okay, look, I don't like the exterior lighting section, we need to change X, we would provide you with that updated version if that's what was needed in a markup version. But in terms of being able to do this with markup, it simply was not feasible. Generally where staff comments came up, it was to make sure the document was consistent with the master plan and to eliminate some conflicts. We had in the land uses, one that in particular that came up is the short-term transient rentals, the Airbnb style rental property. That's a land use that didn't exist when the 1991 document was approved. It's certainly an issue today, and it was one that was identified that we need to address it. In the initial McKenna draft, they called it vacation rental, and there were no standards associated with it. It was a permitted use; anybody could do it, and no limitations on how it would be done, and there was no approval process. Somewhat similar to what we have for a family daycare home, where they can simply open up one. There's no township review. So that was one of those cases where we said, wait a minute, we need to look at this. This needs to be something that, you know, if this has potential to cause real problems in neighborhoods, there needs to be some sort of review. And so that was the kind of adjustment that was made. We first of all didn't call it, changed it from vacation rental to short-term rental, which is more consistent with the national language for that activity, but we also changed it to a special use. So those were the kinds of adjustments that were made by staff, is to comply with be consistent with the master plan, and to have internal consistency in the document where there were issues like that.
That makes it significantly harder for us to review this entire document to find every change.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at this point, what you're looking at really is this document as it is, not looking at necessarily the changes all the way through, but is this document as it is right now consistent with what you would like to see? That's really the goal. And so it's looking at this document and saying, is this right for our community as it is right now? You know, during the discussion, one thing with anytime you're updating an ordinance, there is a lot of discussion that goes on, a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of, wait a minute, why are we doing this? There are some things that need to be changed for state law reasons or case law that requires us to make an adjustment, like signs, for example. But there's simply a lot of what is the right policy for the township. And so this reflects all of that past discussion. As I said, beyond the past discussion at the Planning Commission level, it reflects the township staff's review, looking at what are the township's current policies related to these things, and does this match those, and making tweaks where there was an error, essentially, by the consultant. That's really the goal, is to make sure it's consistent internally and overall. Does this reflect the Planning Commission's preferences and priorities? So I understand the desire to have the markup, and I respect it, but there's just no way to do it from a practical standpoint. It's unreadable because all the little details, even in some cases, for example, in this table, we move land uses around in the table to try to group them better together. The table, the original table did not have a reference at all to agricultural uses, for example. It had agricultural uses scattered in commercial and other and elsewhere. And we said, you know, this is still a community that has an agricultural component, that there's an agricultural community here, rural environment. And so we wanted that called out. And so there were a number of things that were moved around in this table that if we had a markup version, you would have seen multiple references as it taken from one spot, added to another, and all those things that make it tracking it essentially impractical.
So are there comments or questions on section 3.4? Well, actually, from 3.4 on, the whole section on the different land uses, different districts and the permitted uses within those districts.
My only question with regard to that, and I thought section 3 was fine, was it said zoning districts and map. Are we going to are there going to be a redoing of the map? Because there are some, I think there was elimination of the renaming of R3A and B. We renamed R4, we eliminated R5, and we eliminated B6. So is there going to be an updated zoning map that goes along with this that then coincides with the appropriate districts?
Yes, yeah. Peter has worked with our GIS expert on this at the start, just simply to start that process. We have identified areas that will need to be adjusted. The master plan already gives us guidance as to what those districts what those areas should go to. So we'll be making those changes as part of this. So that will be brought to you when you're ready for a public hearing on this ordinance text. We will also be bringing to you the updated zoning map with the changes for those specific areas. I don't recall how many there were, but there are a number of essentially neighborhoods that would have, or areas of the commercial district that would have to be adjusted. You know, as you said, eliminate B6 to go to the corresponding business district that the master plan identifies. So those will be coming to you. You'll have that information. The shutdown right now is preventing us, or has prevented us from proceeding with that, but we have time to wrap that up and have that information to you to correspond to the same public hearing as the text document.
Okay, thank you.
I actually have a question from this section, and it actually relates to something we were just doing. You've got adult foster care family home and child or daycare family home as a permitted use in most of these sections. Whereas there are subcategories. Group homes are special use. So can you explain why the family home is a permitted use, but the group home is a special use?
Yeah. This is governed by state law, similar to our daycare home item that's governed by in that case, the State Zoning Act requirement. This is, I believe, the Foster Care Act and also some corresponding case law that sets out what we have ability to require a special use permit for and what we don't. And so what you see there, all those titles are based on the state licensing requirements and their corresponding definitions that reference those. It's based on the number of people or children that are allowed in that under that particular license. So a foster care family home has a very small limit. I think it's, don't quote me on it, 6, I believe, but that is a use we have to treat essentially just as we would treat a single family home. That it is a permitted use by right. We can require a building permit, essentially to construct one, but we can't require a special use permit for it. but a group home or congregate, I think what we have here, I think we had a congregate care. That's okay. That's elsewhere. But anyway, the group home category where the number's higher, let's say 12. Forgive me for the vagueness on that. There's actually some bills floating around Lansing that would change those numbers, and I can't recall if those were adopted yet or not. But anyway, let's say 12. So that's something we can require a special use permit for. We still have to allow it in residential districts, but we can go through the special use permit process for it. So that's how that was set up.
Okay. Any other questions on basically 3.4 through 3.18? Alex, or no, yeah, Alex?
Yeah, I had a question. Under college and universities, it says it's permitted, but there's nothing that it's permitted above. Is that supposed to be over in OS?
That's good. Thank you. That's interesting. Actually, what that is a typo that the consultant looked at our map, and on our zoning map, there's a big splotch that says CMU on it, and it's of course within the city of Mount Pleasant. There is one small vacant parcel of land that CMU owns in the township that has nothing, it's not connected to the university. And they assumed that there was a CMU zoning district. And so they created a CMU zoning district, which was that last column, and put the college and university in it. So that's actually an error that would be deleted. Both the college and university and the P should be deleted. So we'll make sure that gets done. Just for reference, we have a separate category just above it: business schools, colleges, and private schools operate for profit, that is essentially allowed in the business districts. And so if the college wanted to have a facility and they were willing to follow our zoning ordinance, which we've limited ability to enforce that, the business districts would be the place where they could go. So they don't need the separate category here of college and university public.
On the last page of that table, on page 3-6, extractive operations is a permitted use in the ag district. Is that accurate?
That is intended with, as you know, we sent out an email about having a public hearing on the zoning ordinance amendment that corresponds to the extraction ordinance that was just passed by the board, and we did set that meeting for June 8th, and based on the doodle poll results. But that amendment would remove extraction operations, or in this case, what the current ordinance calls sand and gravel pits, from the list of special uses, make it a permitted use in the ag district, and reference then the extraction ordinance to say the use must comply with the extraction ordinance. So this was set up in that framework, anticipating that the extraction ordinance would be adopted. If it hadn't been, we would have had to make an adjustment here.
Okay.
All
right. Any other questions about that table or the specific individual district summaries? If not, what about section 3.19, planned unit development? That's, again, a section that, well, that section's new, right? We don't have something like that in our current ordinance. I guess I would just ask Rodney and Peter, not that the ordinance should be written to please any particular applicant or any particular person per se, but there was a project that came before us or was going to come before us, and there was some discussion about PUD versus, other ways of doing it. Are you comfortable that what's here is going to be flexible enough and will, allow projects of that nature to go forward in a way that we're not going to still have people coming wanting to tweak the zoning ordinance?
So yeah, so the this plan unit development section is intended, as you said, to have some flexibility for to give you the opportunity to at least consider projects that might have a mix of land uses, might be a mix of commercial and residential or something else, or they may have some creative idea that just doesn't quite fit within the strict ordinance requirements. It simply gives you a path to consider it. The intent is to set this up so that it's an optional form of development. Everybody has to essentially be in agreement. There's not a requirement under state law that you must approve a PUD. It's something that anybody could propose, but it is something also that can simply be rejected. Now, we don't want to do that there. Where it is beneficial is in implementing the master plan, especially in the bluegrass area, where there is an intention for a newer environment and potential creative mix of land uses, and so it does give a way, one of the ways that the master plan for the bluegrass area can be implemented. It's not the only tool that's in this updated ordinance to do that. We'll be talking about one of the other ones that's on this list as well, the mixed use buildings. But it is a tool that is available to you. It's a tool that the state law allows. And the goal here was to set it up to be as easy to work with as possible for you as well as for an applicant, while making sure the township is protected, to provide some standards and criteria that help to make sure that what we get are solid projects that might come through this means.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on the section on planned use developments or the planned use development district? Well, seeing none, we'll move on. If someone thinks of something, we can come back to it. As Rodney pointed out, the next one is sort of related to that, and that's section 6.24, mixed use buildings. Starts on page 6-15. Anything on mixed use buildings? Okay. How about racetracks and private off-road courses, section 6.36? The next one is 6.58, short-term rental housing. Begins on page 6-35. I have a question. Page 6-38. So this is again dealing with the this would be the section dealing with the Airbnb type things, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So number 3, period of time. it says the short-term rental may be for any period from 1 night to 30 nights. A maximum of 1 short-term rental event shall occur in any 4-night period. My question was, why is that restriction there? Why couldn't you have one person stay 1 night and then 2 nights later, another separate person stays for 1 night?
Yeah. So this gets to the challenge that we have, and this is a standard that first of all, any standard here, if it can be changed. I mean, this is like, so this is, we're setting township policy with this ordinance. So if there's a policy that you don't feel is right, we absolutely make adjustments on that. If there's something that's required by law, we'll let you know. Essentially, if there's something we can't change or we must include, we'll let you know. So anything else is fair game to delete, change, update, whatever needs to be done. The goal of this particular provision is related to ensuring that the property remains a single-family home, first and foremost. Where there have been problems with short-term rentals is they have become hotels. They have been bought in communities where, beach communities, for example, like Michigan, but others as well. Grand Rapids has had challenges with it. There have been a number of communities that have had challenges where blocks of homes have been bought by investors, turned into Airbnb rentals, and they're essentially operated as hotels. So it changes completely the character of a neighborhood. If you have an occasional rental in an owner-occupied home, it has no effect on anybody. It's the same as if you invite a friend over. If you have rentals at a limited rate like this, that might not be an owner-occupied home. It may be a rental all the time, but it's only rented essentially twice a week. That also is going to have a very limited impact on the character of the neighborhood. You're not going to have different groups in every night, and so it's all about retaining that at its core that single-family home character. However, this is a provision that can be set up in a number of different ways. It's one that would largely, quite frankly, be almost an honor system, because nobody's going to be watching the driveway and trying to figure out who's a rental and who's not. Where this would come up is if we get complaints. We're getting a different party every night. Well, this is a provision we can then enforce to say, hey, look, you're only supposed to be renting 2 times a week. Show us your log, and show us that you're complying with that. So it's really an enforcement tool if somebody's abusing the land use.
Fair enough.
I don't know, as a user of Airbnbs, that one's a tough one. If I was to, that's gonna be a tough one for somebody to comply with. Also, the occupancy, the next bullet point. There's been many times where if you have a larger room, you're gonna find another bed or another double bed in order to meet that other customer that has a larger family or what have you. So that might be a little restrictive. And I think it's based on the design of the house. I'm just throwing out as a suggestion that I think the 1 night, because Airbnbs are very nice for a 1 night, no restriction of having to do 2 nights, which a lot of people do. But if you can do 1 and then be able to rent it for the next concert that's coming into the casino or whatever, I think that restriction should be, we should let loose on that a little bit. And so Airbnbs, do you have to have, you're targeting a residency that doesn't rent out the whole house? It's actually somebody that lives there, because every Airbnb that I've stayed in typically has a minimum number of plates and a coffee maker, and it's definitely not a residence.
There's really two. Some are occupied homes, and I certainly have used them as well. I stayed in a lovely home in Holland last November for a conference that the couple operated. They simply rented out. They had 2 bedrooms, and they rented me one, and it was lovely stay. I stayed there a couple nights. I suppose I have to give the caveat because it does come into play. My brother works for them. He works for the corporate headquarters. He goes around setting up their computer networks around the world. So I do have a I don't have financial connection. I don't have stock in it. He has stock in it, but anyway, he does work for him. This ordinance does not. It can be an owner occupied renting a room, or it can be rent the whole place. Either way, it simply sets the occupancy limits and the period of time limits, but it doesn't differentiate. Some ordinances do. Some ordinances essentially allow an owner-occupied home far more latitude. It might even be a permitted use where they can simply do it as long as it's essentially a small portion of the home. But this ordinance, and this is new. And so there may be a need to try it out and see what happens. We really don't know what the desire is for this kind of activity, and we maybe get an applicant or two that then requires to kind of look at this again. As I said, I don't object to changing any part of this. There's no restrictions in the state law here. We can add or subtract whatever we want. We don't even have to technically allow it. It's not any kind of a protected land use. But because a lot of people want to do it, because it actually has value to provide an additional source of income that might benefit, for example, empty nesters, others that help people stay in their home and even help improve older homes by having additional income. It is a positive in those cases.
Other comments on mixed or short-term rental housing?
I mean, the only thing I'd like to just add, and I think there'll be a number of sections, well, not a number, but there's going to be a handful of sections throughout this whole thing that we've done. And, we're not going to be able to catch everything. I think it's going to be in our due diligence that if something comes up and we take a look at it and we all go, you know what, common sense says that we need to make a change and let's make it happen. I think we're going to be addressed with that at some point. So, I appreciate your comments, Commissioner Darren. I think that, if something comes up that doesn't seem right, I think we as companies got to do the right thing and make that necessary change.
Fair enough. Any other comments? Okay, if not, then we'll go ahead and move on. The next highlighted section was section 7.5, accessory uses, buildings, and structures. It's right on the first page of section 7. I guess our attention was mainly drawn to the table on page 7-3. I have to say for myself, I don't have a whole lot of feel for some of these dimensional things. So I tend to rely on the judgment of the experts in terms of what's reasonable and customary in the business of that.
Did these numbers change from our original?
Well, these numbers are changed from our current ordinance. They were changed. The draft that McKenna prepared, this section was far more restrictive, actually. And when we looked at this, Peter in particular was very, very helpful in reviewing this and looking at what are we doing, what, because obviously he deals with this regular basis, and there was a recognition that the McKenna draft that came back just was not workable for the township. And so Peter had some very good recommendations, and those are incorporated into this to ensure that what you see here, it reflects characteristics of what is being requested in the township, but also reflects the characteristics of certain lot sizes and such. So it definitely has been worked over based on Peter's experience in particular with these types of buildings.
Right. You know, I see this 14-foot max height accessory building. Is that under the eaves or is that the peak?
That is actually the average height as the ordinance defines it. So for a gable roof building, that is the height of the side wall plus half the distance from the top of the wall to the peak of the roof. So 14-foot average height for kind of a standard gable roof might be 18 or 19 feet to the peak easily. It just depends on how steep the pitch is.
Right. I'm just, you know, can you even pull a motor home in a garage that's 14-foot average? I don't know that.
Yeah, you can. Typically what happens is you go with a 10-foot high sidewalls, or you can even do a 12-foot high sidewall if it's essentially a single wide space, one RV space. And with that, with either 10, especially 10-foot, that's easy to do in an RV and still meet the 14-foot height requirement. Here again, if there is interest or concern, this is another area where an adjustment is easy to make. Right. Where we run into trouble is the taller we make it, the more likely we are to get a second floor, and the more likely a second floor is going to turn into an apartment or all kinds of other things that it shouldn't be there. One of the challenges we have with accessory dwelling or accessory buildings is they become accessory apartments. It's a sort of a constant struggle with people saying, well, you know, I want to put a sink, I want to put a toilet, you know, I want to put a shower. Next thing they want is a kitchenette, and you basically have built an apartment. And that is something that the ordinance has restrictions on. The current ordinance doesn't allow at all. So that's where we have challenges is by limiting the height, we limit the ability to do some of those things that can become a nuisance in other ways. But it's certainly something where if we set it at 15 feet or even 16 feet, you know, it would allow additional height without causing a great deal of trouble. The only other thing I'll tell you is that these buildings, if you look at the setback requirement, it has a very short side yard setback, 5 feet. So if you would like to go to a taller building, I would recommend that you change the setback because one of the basic requirements of the zoning ordinance or purposes of the zoning ordinance is in protecting the ability of every property owner to have adequate light and air to their property. It's right out of the state act. The taller the accessory building, the more shadow it's going to have on the neighbor, and especially at a 5-foot setback. So if we raise it up more, I would suggest we send that setback further, maybe out to 10 feet to make sure that we're not shadowing the neighbor's garden. Essentially, that's really the main reason to avoid it.
I have to agree with that because I'm living through that right now, and I like the 1,500 square foot for under 2.5 acres. Have right now on a 2-acre lot, I think the guy's got a 2,400 square foot accessory building, and I'm guessing that his peak height has got to be 16 to 18 feet. Is that what you'd say, Alex, there?
Oh, yeah.
16 to 18 feet, and it is an abomination. I think, 2.5 acres is not that big of a lot, especially when you have a 2,000 square foot house on it. And like we were just talking with setbacks, he wanted to, because it's such a large structure, he wanted to tuck it away in the corner that's abutting 2 other yards. And so, to your point, Rodney, it is very tall. It's not nice looking at all. So I would like to recommend at least a 10-foot side yard setback. And I believe where the backyard setback is 20 feet, or is it 25 feet?
For the,
It's a 5-foot side and 5-foot rear currently, and then they have to meet the current setbacks for the front yard.
Is it a 5-foot rear? Because he had to come into the appeals board in order to go further, to decrease the side yard or the backyard setback. So, again, it's very tall. I think the 1,500 square foot, in my opinion, is good with a 14-foot average peak. I agree that you may not get the RVs into a large pole barn. You may have to put in a single door, not very wide pole barn to get an RV in there. It's only a 2.5 acre lot, so.
I got to believe this problem it'd be fairly focused in terms of the scope of that type of issue. I'm sure in Union Township there's certainly a number of 2-acre lots, but when you're talking about 2 to 2.5 acres, it seems like the vast majority of those lots are going to be more like a 1/2 acre to an acre maximum. So I'm comfortable leaving. If we want a larger setback, we can talk about that, but I'm comfortable leaving the current standards where they are to see if it becomes problematic in the future.
Well, I'm speaking from current ordinances. I think it's a problem. I mean, you guys have heard me whine about it for the last couple of years. So,
I'm sorry. You think the setbacks are a problem, correct, Mike?
Setbacks and the size of the accessory building.
So you want smaller than 1,500 square foot?
No. Nope. I agree with the 1,500 square foot limitation. This 2-acre parcel behind me has a 40 by 60 pole barn accessory building on it. And I just think it's too big. So, for the lot. So what I think is being proposed here looks good.
Okay, right. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
So what happens if this guy's barn burns down? Can he not replace it?
Correct.
If we change the rules?
Yeah.
Yes, if the rules are updated that wouldn't allow his building to be built under this new ordinance, whatever it is, his building would become a legal and non-conforming structure. It can remain until it's removed. The ordinance, if you look at the nonconformities section of the ordinance, there are some specific protections in there. So, if it was wiped clean to the ground, anything new would have to be built to meet the current ordinance. But if it was, for example, if it caught fire and partially was destroyed, there's some language in there about how much damage is done before it has to comply with the current ordinance. With a pole barn, it's relatively easy to build. If you had to rebuild, to build new, it's not as if you have a full foundation underneath it and lots of infrastructure already there that you want to be able to reuse again. But even in that case, like I said, the nonconformity section offers some pretty strong protections to existing buildings that may no longer be allowed under new regulations.
No, I'm just a little concerned with the height. I mean, I have a 2-story detached garage at my house, and it is a very nice structure.
How big is your lot?
2.5 acres.
Okay, so you're in that. Was it? Of course, the break point is 2.5. Are you 2.49 or 2.5?
I have no idea.
Because
I mean,
if you look, if one thing in the table, we were talking about height. You have accessory building, and they have other accessory structures. So accessory building, the height actually does have an adjustment. On the bigger lots, it can be 15 feet or 16 feet high. So if you have 10 acres or greater, you could potentially have an accessory building that's 16 foot high, average height. But that's on a big lot. Now the other accessory structures, this gets into sheds and pools and gazebos, things like that. That's what other accessory structures is defined as. So. Right. So you do have some ability to have a taller building.
Right. I just think if you go and you write this 14 foot, all you're limited to is a 10-foot sidewall pole barn with a 812 or a 612 pitch.
Yeah.
That is not an attractive structure. But I don't know what the correct answer is either.
There are really 3 sections of every zoning ordinance I've ever worked on that were the hardest to update and the most amended, both before I worked on the ordinance and after. Accessory structures is number 1 on that list. The other 2 are fences and signs. But accessory structures it's always going to be a work in progress because there are things that come up. So one thing, I guess, one comment I'll make in general, I think it was really made already, but I'll just emphasize it, is that anytime we update an ordinance in this comprehensive manner, if I'm the consultant, having been in Chris Duzen's seat a number of projects, I always say, expect to have a punch list of things over the next year. Work with it for a year. And over that year, you're probably going to have a punch list of items, just like when you buy a new house or you buy a new car. You have a punch list of things you need to go back to the dealership for, or go back to the builder for, and say, hey, look, you got to fix this. So there will be a few items that will come up as we work with the new ordinance when it's adopted. That probably about a year in, we will put together a little punch list of amendments to take care of those things. And it's just from experience working with it that those will come up. This may be one of those sections that we look at that again.
Oh, we'll crease it and look at it again, I guess.
I got a question in regards to the setbacks. I'm just trying to being new. I'm just looking at what are the setbacks based on. Are setbacks based on the size of the building? For example, like Mike, if I'm understanding you correctly, the building's extremely large and it sits 5 foot off your property line. Is that correct? But wouldn't a building that's extremely tall, if the landowner had the acreage to put it, maybe the taller the building, the bigger the setback? Am I way off, or am I? Maybe I apologize if I'm not.
There is a provision in here. If you look on, it's page 7-2 under setbacks, that item C2 setbacks, and that item E, the bottom of that list, the very last item on that page, you'll see, accessory building structure over 14 feet in height, over 50 foot in length, adjacent to a lot boundary, or 1,500 square feet in floor area, shall conform to the minimum yard setbacks for the principal building in the district. So.
I'm just looking, what are those? I'm sorry, I'm not able to.
Yeah.
Not familiar with the book. I was just looking for what those actual setbacks were then.
Yeah. So it's based on whatever the zoning district is. We can go back and look at that table. But if side yard might be 20 feet, or rear yard might be 40, 50, whatever those numbers are for that particular zoning district. But this is getting back to, I think, Mike's comment about larger buildings. that if it is a large building, it would be required to be set back further than that 5-foot minimum. So it's not really a graduated thing. As it gets gradually bigger, it has to go further. It's essentially a step, a bigger step. You know, as long as it's underneath these numbers, it can be as close as 5 feet to a property line. If it's over those numbers, it has to be whatever those yard setbacks are. But it would definitely be larger than 5 feet.
Thank you, and I apologize for not being as familiar.
No, that's okay. That's a great question. Thank you for asking.
So I think what I'm hearing as far as the bottom line on this is that there's no magic set of numbers that we're going to be able to divine right now, and that maybe we should just kind of move on and work our way through this and come back. So you mentioned the three things were accessory buildings. You said fences and signs. So the next item is fences and walls, section 7.6. Actually, a short section.
This is not, right now, we allow 6-foot high fences. This proposes to keep that. The McKenna draft had, it was 2 pages long, and it had lots of standards and it actually focused on encouraging walls. It was very much a city type of ordinance language. And so this was another one. Peter was very, very helpful and offered some good counsel. The main change, what we did is we really said, no, we can't have that radical of a change. That was not something the Planning Commission discussed. It was not part of the diagnostic review. It just really seems to have gotten tucked into the document by the consultant. And so what we said was, let's focus on the issues we have. And the issues we have were basically with maintenance. Fences are not taken care of. And also that right now, under a current ordinance, we don't require any kind of a permit for a fence to make sure it actually complies with the ordinance. People can simply put up a fence, and essentially we'll find out about it after the fact, after they've gone through all the construction, all the costs, and then we discover that it doesn't meet the ordinance requirement, and we have to essentially try to enforce that after the fact. So we added the maintenance standard language that you see there. That's simply something we can use as an enforcement tool if we need to. And we added the requirement for a zoning permit to install most fences. And that's simply so that a resident can find out ahead of time that what they're proposing is fine, or find out ahead of time before they invest in it if there's a problem that they need to make an adjustment on. So those were the changes that ultimately came to you.
I'm comfortable with that section unless someone's got an issue with the height, which I don't, but.
Let me just ask real quickly. So the zoning permit, you say except for short decorative fence elements less than 10 feet in length in agricultural operations. But so a person in a residential district, let's say they want to put a decorative split rail fence along their driveway, just for whatever reason, maybe to put roses on it or something. If it happens to be 20 feet, they'll have to apply for a permit.
They would, yeah, it would require a permit in that framework. And that number, I mean, here again, we can set the number wherever we wish. 10 feet covers. It really was envisioning the types of corners, you know, where you fence a corner with like a split rail. You might have a short section of split rail that goes each way. Well, you know, that 10 feet usually covers what people might do to mark a corner of their property that way. The number we can set anywhere you like. If you would prefer 20 feet or 30 feet, we can do whatever. The longer we make it, the more likely we are going to have people that will say, oh, I'm going to put up my 20-foot section or my 19-foot section here. I guess let's call it 18, because that would be a pretty common number. 18-foot section here, and then tomorrow I'll put my other 18-foot section up and keep going around until they've put up 2 acres of fencing without a permit. The key for a zoning permit is, and this is one of the items that's on my list, is it should be inexpensive or even perhaps free to get one, to encourage people to come and get it ahead of time. I know a number of communities that have eliminated the fee for a zoning permit to encourage people to come get one instead of, essentially ask for permission instead of asking for forgiveness. Because unfortunately people, once you've invested a lot in, you bought it all, you built whatever, it's really hard to get them to take it down when it doesn't meet the ordinance after the fact. But if we can review a zoning permit and say, hey, listen, your building is a foot too tall, can you make an adjustment here, and maybe even suggest, here's how you could easily fix this, then they can fix it on paper when they don't have a big investment, and then build it accordingly. I tell people that zoning permits are cheap insurance, because if you have a zoning permit that Peter has signed, saying, yes, this meets our ordinance, first of all, if we made a mistake, and signed something we shouldn't have, they've got the permit. They go, here you go. We can't take that back. We've given them approval for it. But also, if anybody ever complains about it or says, hey, does that really meet the ordinance? They can go right to the permit and say, here it is. I signed for it, saying it meets the zoning. So it really is a useful tool. And so one of the items as part of this will be looking at the fee schedule and making some suggestions to the board of trustees to consider with regards to what fees we charge for different types of applications, with the goal of making it as easy as possible for people to get a zoning permit.
Other comments on that? So the next item is the last one for section 7. It's section 7.11, allowable and prohibited uses. And I guess the main issue here is just to say no to marijuana, at least for now, right?
That's correct.
All right. So hearing no outcry, at least at the moment, we'll move on to section 8. 8.2,
I
exterior.
have a question, Phil, on 7-13
Oh yeah, go ahead.
about the grading regulations.
Mm-hmm.
The grading permit shall be required for all instances where grading, excavation, stockpiling, or alterations to a land exceeding 20 cubic yards. I work for a firm that delivers 20 cubic yards to people's lots daily. I think this quantity is way too low. I think even down below in B, where grading plan is required, the applicant must first submit 2 copies of a grading plan prepared by a professional land surveyor for 20 cubic yards.
So I don't know where this section came from in terms of what directed it into the ordinance. This is not something that staff did. This came from the McKenna draft, and it is something that, as I said, with anything, it can be altered. It can even be deleted.
Right.
We have a stormwater management ordinance that covers some of this ground.
Right, and I think I have a question on that one also when we get to it, 8.7 or 8.8.
Yeah. So this is really a policy of the planning commission as to what you would like to do with it.
I'm sorry, which section again?
I'm on page 713 talking about 7.18.
1.8. Okay. All right.
Yeah, Alex, what do you think would be reasonable there? I don't have a feel.
I think if you were a 400 yard move situation, I mean, even to require a civil engineer to design something, and then if you go to the next section back, 8-8 stormwater management, you have to put in stormwater management controls if you move 20 yards.
Yeah, that doesn't seem reasonable.
No. So I think, and I agree, a grading permit, but there has to be some significant dirt moving.
If that's the plan commission's preference, I certainly have no objection to it. This is not an area that I have I would defer to Alex on that one in terms of what's recommended. I agree that 400 square feet, 400 square feet, 400 square yards is a number that actually has a potential to impact. 20
Right.
square yards is not.
400 cubic yards of,
Cubic yards, thank you.
yeah.
Sorry.
But, and again, I'm not an expert. I'm not even an amateur at this. There's a big difference between 20 and 400. Why did you pick
one dump truck load is 20 yards. So if somebody gets one dump truck load of topsoil delivered to their yard,
Yeah.
they would have to have an engineered survey and stamp their plan.
Right. No, I get the argument about why 20 is too small, but 400 is a big leap from that. So I guess I'm wondering why 400, why not 200, why not 100?
I mean, you're talking about a $6,000 plan from a surveyor.
It's not promoting development.
No. No, I get a grading permit, and I agree a grading permit is probably warranted in many locations, but this one's tough.
So do you just say you need a grading permit? Do you have to put a size limit?
Well, if we don't, then it would be required every time you move dirt.
Right. Well, I'm just wondering what the wording would be to encourage the grading permit.
People build driveways. I mean, I don't know the quantity is 400. Maybe, I don't know. I have no idea.
So I look at this and I think, okay, based on just our last couple days here, what if somebody decided that they didn't like how their property was draining, so they had a couple truckloads of dirt brought in, and they kind of changed the slope of their lawn, and all the water the next time went off into their neighbor's yard. What's the recourse for that?
We have that issue right now. We have an ordinance enforcement issue where in this case it's a business that filled land, but in a rural area, and changed the drainage, and the neighbors are saying that it's affected the drainage on their property. We're in the middle of that. It certainly does happen, and
right.
One option could be I've worked with grading regulations that took a different approach, that simply said that kind of set the principles, you might say, set the standards. Number one, you can't alter the grade in a way that affects drainage on your neighbor's property, either water flowing off your property into theirs or water flowing off of theirs onto yours, and would also set some basic standards about how much fill can be put on a property. I've seen them. Now, this is in an area that is in Bay County, where it's all flat lake plain, and they basically set the standard that you can't go more than 3 feet higher than the center of the road for any kind of fill. Period. In addition to also maintaining drainage on across properties. We could do something like that. We could also, as you said, simply set a higher minimum before the grading permit's required. It is, as I didn't have anything to do with how this came to be in the ordinance. I assumed it was something the Planning Commission had requested. If it is not, if we don't have a problem, then maybe we look at either removing it or adjusting it significantly. The key with anything in the zoning ordinance is it really should be solving a problem we have, or making things better, implementing our master plan. You have some positive focus in that regard. And so if this is not going to do that, then it should be altered or removed.
Well, part of the issue is if you deal with a lot over on Belmont, or a smaller lot where there's 70 by 200, or you deal with a 2.5 acre lot where I'm at, 40 yards makes a big difference.
Right.
So part of, some of that wording where if you're changing the shape of your lot to alter drainage, you have to require a grading permit. I mean, I think that covers and catches both instances.
Yeah, my personal opinion is, given just the world we live in today, as far as, the flow of water becoming increasingly important is that I think this section is valid, is worth having, but I'm open to the idea of modifying it in such a way that it's not onerous for really small projects. So I like the idea of tying it to whether you're altering the drainage characteristics of your property or not. And I also think, Alex's point about, 20 or 40 cubic yards on a small lot, it's a big deal, but on a big lot, it's really not.
Right.
So maybe there are ways of kind of tweaking that so that it's more kind of project specific or whatever. But I think the principle that people should be responsible for not totally messing with their drainage characteristics is important.
I would agree with that. Is it sound like that maybe Rodney could bring us some sample language, or maybe be able to provide a little bit of research that we could look at as a review?
Yes, we can.
Something as an alternative to this?
Yep. Yeah, so we can certainly come back to you with something to take a look at.
Great.
Okay, I'm good. Thank you. So we're ready to move on to section 8. In section 8, we've got exterior lighting. Section 8.2 begins on page 8-3. It's got the definitions, the standards, examples of different types of lighting, some nice diagrams. Any questions or comments on the section on exterior lighting? Hearing none, we move to section 10, landscaping and screening. Mainly.
Let me stop on 8.1.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's this stormwater management section again. It's got a 20 cubic yard.
Yeah, page 8.8-8.
Yeah. One of the questions was, the stormwater management plan shall be submitted for review and approval in accordance with Article 3. Are we going to have Article 3 in this ordinance, or are they gonna have to go somewhere else?
No, that's a separate ordinance. It's just referencing it.
Okay. And then that's 20 cubic yard requirement.
It seems like that goes a little bit hand in hand with the last one, if we're talking about finding some alternative language for that.
Yeah.
All right.
So we'll take a look at, these are essentially tie-barred together, this and the grading. I'll make the note for both of them to take a look at that and maybe bring you something back that follows the direction the discussion we had with the grading regulations.
Right. And somewhere in there, I think that there should be, under this section, if you reconstruct a parking lot, more than just milling and overlaying, that it should also be brought up to stormwater ordinance.
I think the city's done that in their last ordinance, didn't they?
Yeah, and they were very restrictive. I would like to put, I wrote something down here, excavating 7,500 square feet of parking lot. If you're rebuilding that, then you have to bring it up, or, you know, I think if you're just milling the surface and overlaying, it probably should be fine. But if you're going to change drainage patterns, install storm sewer, install curb islands, that it should be brought up to the current standard. And I didn't see that here. I think that's just something to look at.
Okay.
Anything else on that? Since we came back to this section, on page 8-10, so this is in the section on floodplains. Just a curiosity, it cites a bunch of maps with effective date of 2/5/2014. How often are those maps updated?
These are maps prepared by FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. They are the underlying data, topographic data that those maps are based on is not updated by FEMA very often at all. Occasionally, individual property owners will seek to have their property removed from a floodplain by having a more detailed survey done of their particular property, and then they can essentially petition FEMA to be removed if they can prove that they're not really in the floodplain elevation that FEMA has set. The problem is FEMA's topographic contours are very broad. I can't remember if it's 2 feet. It's not 2 feet. It's like 5 feet or something, 5-foot contour. So you can easily end up in a floodplain when your property really is actually above it. So they're updated usually that way. The big update does not happen very often, but small adjustments are made as property owners seek to have those reviews done.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this tonight, but I'll briefly ascend my soapbox that I think a lot has changed since 2014, and I wish those maps were updated more often because it isn't just elevation, it's rain patterns and all this other sort of thing. So
yeah, I will say this is because of the data that they use, they tend to be overly broad. They tend to have more land in the floodplain than actually is in the floodplain based on their own elevation. So it's not always the case, but they tend to be bigger areas.
As a non-developer, I understand why people that develop land and make projects and so on, you don't want all your land availability to be not there. But on the other hand, if a person builds something and they sell it off, they're long gone. And then if 5 years from now, there's what's considered to be a 500-year flood, but it's really an every other year flood now, and it's underwater, then, it's the current owner that suffers. It's not the developer. So
right.
I don't think that those things should be all that unrestricted myself. All right, I'm done off the soapbox. So where were we? We were about to go to section 10, landscaping and screening, and mainly, according to the notes, the main change in this case is just the addition of a lot of nice diagrams. Any comments on section 10?
One thing I noticed in here is that I know we had talked in the past about a 6-foot tree. I see in this section there are now 8-foot tall trees. And I'm wondering if there's, that's what I caught.
I was going to say that same thing.
You're talking particularly about the evergreen?
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
2.5-inch deciduous. I just thought that evergreens are now 8 foot, and I believe we all discussed 6 foot was.
Well, it also says above it, landscape screening 6 feet minimum. So I wonder if the evergreen trees if that was a typo. See section 10.2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, up
It
above
says
it,
6.
yeah.
So that's appropriate, I believe.
So certainly 6-foot evergreen is fairly standard for landscape
Correct.
purchase. 8-foot gives you more immediate screening effect, but it's also significantly more expensive.
Right.
And the smaller, the 6-foot tree, typically the larger the tree, the more trouble it has being transplanted. So a 6-foot tree might actually be healthier long term than the taller one. We can certainly make the adjustment to 6 foot for the evergreen tree if that's what you'd like.
I'm okay with that.
If you do that, that appears again in section 10.4. That 8-foot.
I'm sorry, that's the one I was talking about.
Oh, I was looking in the table. There's a table. The table on page 10-2 and the list on 10-9 both say 8 feet. Okay.
Where does it say in 10.2, 8 foot?
The lower table.
It says 6 foot.
Summary of plant material in section 10.4, subsection C. Table.
Yeah. The lower of the tables says 8 feet, right?
Got it. Yeah. All right. And he said there's another place where it says 10 or 8, another place where it says 8 foot.
Yeah, 10-9.
Oh yeah.
Item C3.
Got it. Yep. All right.
Anything else in this section, section 10? Okay, so we'll move on to the third of the Holy Trinity of zoning, which is signs. The long section. Well, while people are looking, I do have a question. It's on page 11-14. Subsection H, community organization signs. Right in the middle of the page.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand, under application, it says any service club, fraternal or veterans organization or religious institution may apply for such a sign. And the heading says signs that identify local clubs, fraternal and veterans organizations and religious institutions by name or logo. So in the section under application, it says the applicant shall notify in writing all service clubs, fraternal and veterans organizations and religious institutions in Union Township, including any incorporated areas, to extend an opportunity to have their name or logo placed on the sign. Are you talking only at this point about those kind of signs that you see at the entrances to townships and towns where it's like all the different, like Kiwanis and this and that? Because I had it as their sign. And so why would you be forcing them to invite other people to be on their sign?
So this is that entrance sign you're talking about. This is not a sign on an individual property. That's a separate category of just a ground sign that's allowed as any business, church or institution wants to have a sign up in front of their property. They can do that. This is that entrance sign you're talking about, logo type entrance sign.
So then is community organization signs an understood term of art for that particular sign, or is there one?
That's a great question. I'm just looking here to see if it was a defined term, because I don't know that answer. And it is not a defined term. So
maybe at least add it to our definitions.
I suppose we're going to have to, yeah. I mean, we don't have to allow this. We can simply.
No, I think they should. I think
but
they're great. I like them. They're fine. But I didn't understand when I read it that was. I thought that maybe that was what they were referring to, but it just wasn't obvious. It wasn't.
Yeah, this was one of those provisions that as I looked at, I said, I asked, how did that get in the ordinance? And it was one of those, nobody could answer that for me. I assumed that somewhere along the way it had been requested. Anyway, we certainly had a definition for the term.
Okay. Other things in the whole section on signs.
Yeah.
Rodney, I wanted to raise the. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan, and then we'll get to Alex.
Well, I was going to raise more of a question that came up during our zoning board meeting, and I'm sure Rodney's familiar with it. But if Alex had a question, certainly he could go ahead of me.
No, I was shooing the cat away.
Oh, okay. So we had an issue come up with the zoning board of appeals, and maybe Rodney or Peter, you can kind of help me with my memory here. It was kind of a two-part issue, but it had to do with condominiumized. Essentially, I think it's related to signage, but I think we wound up defining a condominiumized project as each condominium a separate parcel of land. And I think our ordinance was vague on that, and in doing so, when we determined them to be separate parcels of land, we then essentially allowed them to each fall then under the signage zoning, which would give them each condominiumized unit a certain amount of zoning, or I'm sorry, a certain amount of signage that they could use. And then we ultimately did wind up approving a variance, because essentially the ZBA was faced with an issue of, well, if we don't give a variance on signage, then we're essentially giving them the right to build a sign in front of every single business within the same condominiumized unit. So, and I remember at the time the conversation we had was, is this something that we want to address through our zoning ordinance to ensure that this sort of thing does or does not happen again? And maybe I did a poor job explaining that, Rodney, but could you assist with that, at least to help introduce the topic?
I can. What the applicant requested was creative, and it created the Zoning Board of Appeals interpretation of the definition of the word lot was key. That's really, it was actually not even the sign regulation that started it. It was the definition of lot, which then he claimed that he had multiple lots because he divided this building up into individual condominium units, and each condominium unit was a lot as far as he was concerned. And the Board of Appeals found that for his definition, interpreted the ordinance based on his definition of it, and that led to the rest, as Ryan described, that the potential for a substantial amount of signage that was not really intended for that lot, for that property. So what we have, in fact, as another preview, we talked earlier about the preview related extraction operations. The other preview that's in this document is I asked Chris Dusen to put an updated definition of lot in here. So when we don't have to look at it now, but if you go look at the definition of lot, you'll see that we specifically address that issue of whether a condominium unit can be a lot. That is intended completely to overturn the interpretation the Zoning Board of Appeals made, because the interpretation that was made as it applies to the sign regulations in particular, but quite frankly to a lot of things, it really turns the ordinance upside down. It's not practical. I understand how they got that where they got, and I respect the decision, but it does create a substantial amount of difficulty to be able to have any enforceable regulations if you can simply create a bunch of condominium units.
And as you recall, I think I dissented on
Yes,
both the interpretation, but then also dissented on the variation, the variance that we allowed, because on the basis of, I'm glad to hear that what you're saying is that we're addressing the definition of lot, because you're right, it created a situation for us where, virtually anybody could essentially condominiumize their buildings. And then I would say that for my part, I felt like the ZBA was backed into a little bit of a corner, because we said, all right, well, we've now interpreted this lot to mean that everybody gets their own individual signage rights. And then rather than having it look like a circus with signs in front of every single building and all the rights that come with that, we had no choice but to approve a variance so as to keep the signage to a reasonable amount. So the heart of the problem, you're right, was the lot definition. I'm glad to see that that's there. So it sounds like then we can focus on that as opposed to anything specifically within the signage ordinance here. Right. So.
Other comments on signs? Okay. Hearing none, the next section is section 12.5, non-conforming sites. And the notes say that this is a new section. Any comments? No, we can move to section 14. Section 14 is the administrative procedure section, which has all of our procedures, so it's an important section. First one that was highlighted was 14-2 or 14.2, which is site plan review, one of our main things that we do.
Phil, we also have that 20-yard grading permit in there on 14-1.
Oh, all right. Yeah, on page 14-1, grading permit, you've got your 20 yards.
Yeah, so whatever we come up with, I think we should probably substitute it in there as well.
Yep, thank you.
All right. Okay, well, so be thinking about what you want to talk about here. I do have a couple of questions that I'll bring up. So in the section on the site plan review, which is a long section, on page 14-8, item M as in Mary, this issue of combining preliminary and final site plans. As I think you're aware, we had it as more of an informal than a formal sort of thing before. And so now you've made it, the proposal is to make it the preliminary, a formal thing. but it allows the possibility of them to be combined. And so this sentence says, an applicant may, at the applicant's discretion and risk, and with approval of the Planning Commission, combine a preliminary and final site plan in an application for approval. My question is, how would that happen in practice? How would the Planning Commission weigh in to the point where they knew whether to do a preliminary or to combine?
Yeah, this is an option that I've worked with in a number of communities, and the applicant would apply, and just like any application, it would come before you, and it would come before you as a proposed combined preliminary final site plan. So that would be the action item on the agenda. We would review it, and essentially, I will tell you, we essentially at that point we're reviewing it as a final site plan. They have to meet all the requirements that apply to a final site plan, including that all the outside agencies are in order. Everything's set. This plan is essentially ready to construct. And from the perspective of how do we apply this, what happens is if the Planning Commission finds that it doesn't meet the right requirements for final site plan, doesn't meet all the requirements that apply to preliminary and final, you simply can take action as a preliminary site plan. You simply say, you know, we're not going to grant final site plan approval, but we'll grant you preliminary contingent upon you fixing X, Y, and Z and coming back to us with a final site plan. So that's where you weigh in on it. It works very well. So an applicant that's in a hurry, that thinks they can do it all in one step, has the option to try, and you have every right to simply say yes or no and to approve, as I said, approve only the preliminary if you wish.
Okay. I mean, I'm fine with that explanation. I certainly understand it. I'm not 100% certain that that's what that sentence says, at least in terms of how I read it, but I'm fine with if that's how it's going to play out. Alex, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, are we going to require a preliminary review now?
So this right now we require that the applicant take care of outside agency activity and essentially come to us with a site plan that has been reviewed and acted upon by the Road Commission, by the Drain Commissioner's Office, by whoever else is these other outside agencies are involved. So that also then becomes a plan that has had a lot of engineering work done on it. Mm-hmm. The more outside agency approvals are involved, the more engineering work that's done, the more calcified the plan gets. The harder it is to get a change made if you as a planning commission feel that there is a need to make a certain adjustment or in the design. So what the preliminary site plan process does, you can think of it, I don't want to call it conceptual approval, but the requirements that apply require only very limited engineering, basically. They just enough to make sure that, yes, we could actually build this if we had, if you approve it. So the idea is it's more conceptual in character. So they come to you earlier in the process to get your comments, just as they would ultimately be going out and getting outside agency comments. We want to get your comments in your direction. Now, as I said, you do this informally right now. What we want to do is make it a formal step because first of all, these outside agencies, typically the preference is they want to know that the township likes it. They don't want to be approving something that the township is going to deny. So having a preliminary site plan approval or this conceptual level approval, you're sort of putting your stamp on it saying, yes, we agree that this is workable. You may identify some things that need to be corrected. You may identify some things you would recommend be done. Whatever influence you want to have on that plan. But you're essentially saying we like the overall concept, and that's what the language about effective preliminary site plan approval is talking about. We like the overall layout. We like the overall concept. Go forth and work out the engineering details and come back to us with the final plan for approval. So it allows you to have more influence. It also gives the outside agencies more confidence that what they're reviewing, the township likes. And so they can then take a look at the details and give their comments back. So it's a process that has worked very well elsewhere to ensure the township has the ability earlier in the process to to have influence on the plan if there's a need to.
Right. It just creates another month for these developers to get a plan in construction in a 7-month construction season.
Well, but often the folks are not coming to you in May and June if they want to construct. They're coming to you in January and February, or even November and December.
We haven't had any site plans November, December, January.
Right. I don't know, and it's been interesting because we didn't, and we got a bunch. We have several now, and I think there's 5. I think right now.
Now we're going to create another month delay. I mean, we have never went against the road commission and said, well, the road commissions require you to put curb radiuses in. The planning commission has never said, no, we don't want curb radiuses.
Well, but we're not talking about that kind of a detail. That's an engineering detail. And
Right.
that's sort of.
But I'm just saying, we have never needed to stamp something for the road commission to say, yes, they need a deceleration lane out here.
Right. I understand that. I do. And that is because that's been the longstanding process here, is that the outside agencies actually have more influence on the site plans than you have. And that's a problem because you are responsible for ensuring that what is built reflects the first of all, what the ordinance requires, but also reflects the desired character of this community. The state zoning act says that a site plan should not only comply with the zoning ordinance, this document we have in front of you that we're looking at the details on, it also says that a site plan must comply with the township's planning documents. Well, that's the master plan, non-motorized plan, those the longer range aspirational documents of the township. And it's your job as planning commission to look at that. Does this fit the character of our community? And at the conceptual level, when you can talk about this with the developer earlier in the process, you can deal with things that where a change might be a much better fit in the community, something they hadn't thought of. But you, as the collective wisdom of the residents of the township, because that's who you represent, might think of something and say, look, that I understand that you have this design. Can we make this tweak? And I apologize, I'm not going to be able to come up with a specific right offhand. But look, if you adjusted the building this way, it would still work for you, but it would really be a better fit on this lot or in this neighborhood or whatever that might come into play. And those are changes that are easy to make at the conceptual level for the developer, because he wants to, hey, well, that's a good idea, or boy, I'd love, that's an easy change for me to make. I can make the township happy. It's easy to make early, but it's really hard to make later when you've already gone to the road commission and they have whatever, and you've already done the engineering work that you would then have to redo. So it's not intended to delay the process. It actually speeds it up, because what we find is that in the details of the final site plan, we've already hashed out the big concerns at the preliminary stage when it was easy to do. So when they come back with a final, that looks great. It's an easy approval, get done and go, rather than having multiple meetings, 2 or 3 meetings where they keep having to come back because they just haven't got it all together, or to have a plan that gets approved with a bunch of conditions associated with it. So I found it actually speeds the process up overall. It might not seem like it, but it actually tends to do so.
I don't know about it. I'm not comfortable with it. We've got
But
this.
it's just another option, though.
Well, it's just we have all this preliminary site plan review. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 steps before you get to the planning commission for review.
Oh, well, the steps are, if you look at it on item H there.
Oh, I get, but.
Yeah, those are steps we already do. We do this for every project. Is it eligible? Is it a complete application? Does it meet the ordinance? That's 1, 2, 3.
Application technical review.
So we do that right now. That's Peter. In fact, we were just talking with a gentleman today looking at a project, and Peter was going through those exact steps, saying this is how your plan is going to be reviewed. Those steps, occur in 7, 8, 9, 10 business days. It's not a long process to do that. And any applicant would have the option to come in with a combined preliminary and final site plan if they chose to. So that's still available to them for those like I said, most developers like the idea of being able to come to you at more of a conceptual stage.
Right.
And
We
so-
have always offered that to them.
Yep.
But I think we've had one in the last 6-7 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe a couple. I don't know. I mean, I get what Alex is saying, but I guess I feel like this still has flexibility. I mean, if it's a routine project that's, kind of a continuation of something, or, something that's similar to something that's already been done, or they have a feel for, it's just something that's not really controversial, then, they probably just combine it and skip that step. If it's something new and different, maybe they come to us at the preliminary stage and they want our input. So
the other thing we did is we also we created this minor site plan option, and that's an administrative review. And we expanded the types of projects that can be reviewed administratively. So smaller projects, certain building additions and such, would now right now come to you. It could be reviewed administratively, again, to speed the process up a bit for those kinds of projects.
Do we need to do a schedule check? Or are we gonna push this right on through?
Are you talking about the next steps, you mean?
No, I'm talking about our meeting tonight. We're at 9:30. Wanted to make sure we're all on board with pushing this through.
yeah, we're close to the end. I don't know. I mean, is anyone on a schedule, or just not wanting to go another 15, 20 minutes?
Yeah.
I think we're definitely on track to be done by 10.
Okay.
I kind of like the idea of trying to get through it. Not that I want to be here too long either, but. All right. Well, I have one more question on this whole, on section 14, or at least 14.2. Q, section Q, expiration and extension of site plan approval. I guess I'm just curious why 1.5 years for expiration versus extensions are 1 year. Is there any reason 545 calendar days was chosen?
Well, in the past it's been a year, and extensions of, there's some communities that have extensions of 6 months in the past. I think the COVID-19 is a good example of things take longer, and so giving them a year and a half, we found that that's a number most projects can work with, even in the worst case scenario. And if there is a worst case scenario and they do need an extension, it's easy to get. Basically just have to show a reason, and it can be granted. The other element is that, of course, with going from preliminary to final, is that if they simply move forward to the next step within that time period, there's no need to extend the preliminary. As soon as they apply for final site plan, and we're on to that step, we've left the preliminary behind.
Yeah.
But
the expiration is just to start. So you're giving them a year and a half to start the project.
Right.
I mean, yes, right now that would be valuable to have.
And the thing is there have been economic downturns before, and that's usually where we run into trouble is somebody gets approval and then the economy goes south, and financing or whatever dries up, and they just simply can't start for a period of time. So it's all about trying not to have to have them come back again.
Yeah.
It really is a project that simply still meets the ordinance requirements. We don't, as long as it's within a reasonable time frame, they should be able to pursue it, and they can always get an extension if they wish.
Yeah. No, I get it. And then and then I'll let other people get in here. But number 2 in Q, which is the expiration of the final site plan approval. Construction has begun on the property and is diligently pursued.
Yeah.
So that you always worry about language like that. Who decides diligence? How is that measured? All that sort of thing.
That's a great question. Of course, it would be staff. It would be the ordinance enforcement functions of our department that would ultimately decide if construction is stopped and it's simply not, it's no longer being diligently pursued, we could seek to enforce the ordinance related to that. This actually gets us into the last item in this list, the show cause hearing. This is a tool that is not in many zoning ordinances. I was surprised to see it in ours. I've not run into it very often. I thought it was a really useful tool, and it's been used very well by Union Township. Because what the show cause hearing is an opportunity for the person that is on the receiving end of the ordinance enforcement saying, hey, look, I'm diligently pursuing it. Yes, there was a delay, but I'm diligently pursuing, to go and have a hearing before the Zoning Board of Appeals and make their case. And for staff to have to defend our decision. I don't think they're diligently pursuing it. Here's all the reasons why. And essentially it's adjudicated. The Zoning Board of Appeals listens to both sides and decides, are they in violation or not? And so that's the process. That's what would happen. But in any circumstance with this, the goal is to try to bring the property into compliance. So we're not about trying to get tickets or send people to court. So if things stopped halfway through, it would all be about trying to work with them, first of all, to try to get it finished. And if we can't do that, then pursuing it further. But it is subjective.
Yeah.
That is true.
Well, I've always thought that another appropriate title for Peter is Chief of the Diligence Police.
There you go. Yep.
Other comments on this section? 14.2, I guess we're still in. If not, we can move on to 14.3. 14.3 is special land use permits. That's another key thing we do, is approve those. I thought that the standards, I like these standards. I think they're well written and I think they're better than what we currently have.
Lost you.
Anything on those? If not, the next one is 14.5, which is amendments. I liked how this read. I thought it was a good roadmap for people that needing to do this. I liked all the detail and here's what you should look at and here's how to look at it, that type of thing. Anything on 14.5? Uh, 14.7 just says no conditional rezoning.
Your opinion, Rodney, this isn't a good thing to have in the zoning ordinance?
I am no fan of it because it's not even. This in the state law. This conditional rezoning thing was written in the state law. You might call it the Meridian Township clause. Meridian Township is down near, and Meridian Township got themselves into deep trouble because they had a lousy ordinance and they were not consistent in how they enforced it. And developers were running over them left and right. And because they were of this, they said, we need a process where we can essentially violate our own ordinance, in terms of rezoning property. We can work with developers, and anyway, it was a goofy process. Because what it does, it's all the developer. As written in the law, the developer can propose limitations on themselves. They can propose to self-limit in certain things. You give me residential zoning that allows me 100 units on 100 homes on this property instead of the 20 that are allowed right now under the current zoning. I will voluntarily self-limit myself to 80 units, even though the zoning would be 100. I will voluntarily say I'm only going to build 80, and so that becomes a condition of the rezoning. And so it becomes a rezoning to a new district with a little asterisk next to it that references that self-limitation. As written in the state law, all you can do is say yes or no. You can say yes, we agree to that voluntary limitation, or no, we don't, and we're going to deny you the rezoning. There's no opportunity to have a conversation. What about, to talk about options, to say, well, wait a minute, we don't have any objection to that. Those additional units, but really this is a need we have, or this is a special part of this property here. This portion is environmentally sensitive. Can we, adjust where the units go? Maybe do more duplexes or something to save this area. There's none of that comes up. It's just a yes or no on your part as the state act defines conditional rezoning. And that's where the plan unit development option is so much better. It is that plan unit development for potential conversation back and forth. It allows for flexibility, but it also allows the essentially equal sides. The township and the developer have the ability to both have their concerns raised, and it's an even playing field, and conditional rezoning is simply not. There are some communities that have used it, that like it. I have found that it's all weighted on the developer side, and while I respect developers and I have that's how we implement our master plan, is through private development primarily. We do need to make sure that we have a tool that allows us to protect the township and make sure our master plan is implemented. And conditional rezoning just doesn't do that. So now I'm off my soapbox, because that one is definitely a soapbox item. I mean, I'll put it in if you would like to have it as a tool.
I don't think we used it.
We sort of put it in, but I'm no fan of it.
Anyone else have a thought on that? Okay, so then the last item is the one that Rodney referred to a little while ago, which is the show cause hearing. And I guess we looked at this and kind of, we're a little bit like, are we really a court of law here or whatever? But you argue that it has some value. I guess I just want to ask, now granted, the planning commission is not the final say, because if we rule on something, they can appeal it to the ZBA, but sooner or later there's going to be a decision made. And I guess I'm just wondering, what's the legal liability of us appointed non-elected folks? Are we going to start being named in lawsuits and hauled into court if we make certain decisions?
Well, this show cause hearing is done by the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is the body that hears appeals and hears requests for variances. So this is right in their playbook as to their area of responsibility. What this is about is building an administrative record. Anytime something might end up in court, well, regardless of it end up in court, but let's say a project is headed to court. The very first thing the judge is looking for is, what is the administrative record? Site plan review by the planning commission, the zoning permit process if it was administrative, what is all the meeting minutes. I want to see the administrative record, what happened, and because he's essentially going to be, he or she is going to be looking at were the decisions made in accordance with the law, those administrative actions. What we want to do is make sure as a township, we are building the strongest record to hand to the judge to show that what we were doing respected the law, respected due process, respected constitutional rights, and reflects accurately on what the ordinance requires of that person in that particular circumstance. The beauty of this show cause hearing is it's all about due process. This is, due process of law is right in the Bill of Rights. It is an absolute basic fundamental freedom of Americans is that we have the right to due process of law. Show cause hearing basically allows that person that is subject to violation or whatever the reason is that ends up going under the show cause process. It gives them the right in a public meeting, in a public hearing where they've been invited by notice, and a notice was put in the paper that anybody can come if they wish. They can go in and make their case to the Board of Appeals, which is a body that has a judgment element to them. They make judgment calls. And the township in this circumstance is essentially put in the defendant role. Essentially, they have to defend. We have to defend what we did. Here's why we did it. Here's why it was the right thing to do. And the Board of Appeals looks at that and makes a decision. Was it right? Was it not? But no matter what the decision is, we are building a record that we have given that person every opportunity to make their case, essentially, to both every opportunity to fix a violation, but also every opportunity to be heard before it might end up in court. So it is a very useful enforcement tool, but also a very important due process tool. I think it's a very important item to include in the ordinance for that reason.
Okay. Other comments or questions on that? Does anyone have any other items on any other section that we didn't discuss tonight that they want to bring up?
I don't have any more. We went through the sections that I had questions on.
I think we're relatively close. I mean, I think there's a couple things we raised tonight that were, we've asked for some information back or possibly some revised language, but overall, I mean, I don't see any reason why, why we shouldn't go to a public hearing within the next couple months here at the, I don't know if we'd do it before our June meeting, but certainly probably not that much after that.
So we have a special meeting on June 8th for that zoning ordinance amendment hearing. With your agreement, we'll put this on that agenda, basically just to continue the discussion. And in the meantime, get the ordinance. If there's anything else you have concern about, like I said, if you see typos, feel free to let me know. And maybe at that June 8th meeting, we can look at, are we ready to schedule a hearing? Maybe for the July, as you said, maybe the July meeting, regular meeting for a hearing. We need that time frame ahead of time, 15 days. So it's not something we could do in June, but we could easily set it for July. And that kind of a time frame might work very well. But again, this is your comfort level. So we'll have it on the agenda for that meeting June 8th to continue the discussion. It can also be on the agenda for your regular meeting in June, if you would like to do that. So
yeah.
In the meantime, just keep taking a look at it, and like I said, send me any typos or any small comments you have, and we'll make sure they get taken care of.
Okay. Yeah, the June 8th meeting, that's the zoning amendment for the extraction stuff, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So if that turns out to have 2 hours worth of public comment, then we may not get that much done on the other thing, and it may end up getting pushed back. But you also said we have 5 site plans for June.
We have 5 applications. I think one's a special use permit, actually, but not all of them are ready for Plan Commission review. We've Peter's already identified a couple of them, I believe, that have problems they need to fix, and one we're looking at is this something can be done administratively. So that they're not all 5 coming your way, but they're definitely going to be some on that regular June agenda.
Okay. All right. So we're almost done. So we just have a couple more things to do. One is extended public comment. So we always give the public an opportunity to comment towards the end of the meeting on anything, whether it was on tonight's agenda or not. I don't know if any of you have noticed, but we've had a viewer, not our applicants. We've had a viewer around for most of the meeting. I don't know if he's been watching intently or you know, kind of half watching and half doing other things, but so we'll open extended public comment now. If there's anyone who would like to address the planning commission on any item, whether it's on tonight's agenda or not, raise your hand, make your desire to speak known, and if so, we'll bring you into the inner sanctum here and let you speak, and we ask that you just limit your comments to 5 minutes. Extended public comment is open at 9:51 by my watch. I'm not seeing any indication, so we'll go ahead and close that back up. So final board comment. Any comments from board members? I thought this went really well myself.
Could we confirm the
Useful
time,
tool.
Nate?
June 8th, 7 p.m. Same time as usual.
Will we get a packet like we normally do?
You will. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, June 8th is the regular meeting, and June 16th is June 8th is the special meeting, and June 16th is the regular meeting. Anything else? Any other comments? If not, then we've completed our agenda for tonight. It's been a great meeting. So we'll stand in adjournment until June 8th. Happy Memorial Day, everybody.
Happy Memorial Day.
Hey,